March 15, 1994, London's Royal Albert Hall. A young girl in the third row held up a sign that made Whitney Houston stop her entire concert. Security rushed forward, but Whitney raised her hand. The message on that cardboard would haunt her forever. Write in the comments, where are you listening to this story from? And what time is it right now? The orchestra had just begun the opening notes of I Have Nothing when it happened. Whitney Houston, draped in a midnight blue gown that sparkled under the golden lights of the Royal Albert Hall, was 3 songs into what critics would later call her most flawless performance. Her voice had already brought several audience members to tears during Run to You. The 5,272 seats were filled with London's elite, diplomats, celebrities, members of parliament, but in the third row center section sat a 12-year-old girl named Emma Clark with her mother. Emma wasn't supposed to be there. The tickets had cost her mother Sarah 3 months of savings. Sarah worked double shifts at St. Thomas Hospital as a nurse, but when Emma's doctors said she had less than 6 months, Sarah knew exactly what her daughter's final wish would be. Emma had been practicing holding up her homemade sign for weeks, even when the chemotherapy made her arms shake. But here's the detail that changes everything you thought you knew. Whitney had noticed the girl before the show even started. From behind the burgundy curtains, during sound check, she'd seen a small figure in the third row, bald head covered with a purple scarf, clutching something to her chest. Whitney's bodyguard, Marcus, had mentioned the girl looked unwell. Should we move them further back? He'd asked. Whitney had said no. She had no idea what was coming. The moment arrived at 8:47 p.m., precisely as Whitney hit the bridge of I Have Nothing. The Royal Albert Hall's acoustics, considered the finest in Europe, carried her voice like crystal through the air. She was walking towards stage left, her hand extended toward the audience, when Emma stood up. The sign was written in purple marker, Emma's favorite color. The words were simple, but what they said made Whitney's breath catch in her throat. The microphone picked up her gasp, a sound that 5,272 people would never forget. Whitney, I'm dying, but your voice makes me feel alive. Can I sing with you? The orchestra continued for 3 more bars before the conductor, James Hartley, noticed Whitney had stopped moving. Her hand, which had been gracefully gesturing through the air, froze mid-motion. The spotlight operator, thinking it was a technical issue, kept the beam trained on her face, capturing the exact moment her professional composure cracked. Security guard Timothy Walsh was already moving toward the girl. That was protocol. Anyone who stood up during a performance was to be approached immediately. But Whitney's voice cut through the music. Stop. Don't touch her. Wait. You haven't heard the most shocking part yet. The entire Royal Albert Hall fell silent. You could hear the hum of the lighting rigs, the distant sound of traffic on Kensington Road. Whitney Houston, who had performed for presidents and royalty, who had sung the national anthem at the Super Bowl before 73,000 people, stood trembling on stage. Turn the house lights up, she said into the microphone. Her voice, usually so controlled, wavered. Halfway. I need to see her. The lights came up, revealing the full magnitude of the moment. Emma Clark stood there, barely 4.5 feet tall, her purple sign shaking in her small hands. Her mother Sarah had tears streaming down her face, her hand on her daughter's shoulder. The audience around them had pulled back, creating a natural spotlight of space. Whitney walked to the edge of the stage. The distance between her and Emma was maybe 20 feet, but it felt like miles. She could see everything now. The way Emma's dress hung loose on her thin frame, the dark circles under bright eyes that refused to show defeat, the hope radiating from her face like heat. What's your name, sweetheart? Whitney's voice carried without the microphone. Emma. Emma Clark. And what would you like to sing with me, Emma? The girl's answer would become legendary. Greatest love of all, because you taught me to love myself, even when my body is failing. The most powerful twist was still ahead. The audience gasped collectively. Several people were already crying. A woman in the balcony, later identified as Margaret Thornton, a cancer survivor herself, stood up and began clapping slowly. Within seconds, the entire Royal Albert Hall was on its feet, applauding a 12-year-old girl who had just done what no one else had ever done, stopped Whitney Houston mid-performance with nothing but honesty and courage. Whitney turned to her band leader. "Can we do it?" she asked. James Hartley, who had conducted for Whitney for 3 years, had never seen her like this. Her hands were shaking. Mascara had begun to run down her cheeks, creating dark rivers on her perfect makeup. He nodded and quickly conferred with the orchestra. But Whitney wasn't done shocking everyone. "Emma," she said, her voice now steady and clear through the microphone, "I want you to come up here." Security protocol at the Royal Albert Hall was legendary. No one from the audience was allowed on stage, ever. The venue had hosted the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and hundreds of classical performances since 1871. The rules were ironclad, but on March 15, 1994, the rules shattered. "Stop. What you're about to hear will stay with you forever." Marcus, Whitney's personal bodyguard, walked down into the audience himself. The 6'4" former Marine gently lifted Emma into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, maybe 60 pounds. Her sign fell to the floor, and her mother picked it up, clutching it to her chest, as she watched her daughter being carried toward the stage. The walk took 30 seconds. The Royal Albert Hall remained silent, except for the sound of Marcus's footsteps and quiet sobbing from various corners of the venue. When he reached the stage stairs, Whitney was there, reaching down. She took Emma's hand and helped her up the final steps. Under the stage lights, Emma looked even smaller, even more fragile, but her eyes were on fire with life. Whitney knelt down beside her, designer gowns spreading across the floor, and whispered something in her ear. Emma nodded. The darkest part of the story was about to unfold. Whitney stood and took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Emma Clark. She's 12 years old, and tonight she's going to help me sing. But first, I need to tell you something." She paused, looking directly at Emma, then back at the audience. 3 years ago, my own cousin, 13 years old, died of leukemia. I was supposed to sing at her funeral, but I couldn't. I stood at that podium, opened my mouth, and nothing came out, not even a whisper. I've performed through flu, through heartbreak, through exhaustion, but grief stole my voice. I've never told anyone that story until tonight. Emma reached up and took Whitney's free hand. It was such a small gesture, but the cameras that were recording for the venue's archives caught it perfectly. A dying child comforting one of the world's biggest stars. The orchestra began the opening of Greatest Love of All. The familiar piano notes filled the hall, but something was different. The arrangement was slower, gentler, like a lullaby version of the powerful anthem. Whitney held the microphone between them. She began, "I believe the children are our future." Then something unprecedented happened. Emma's voice joined Whitney's on the second line. "Teach them well and let them lead the way." It wasn't perfect. Emma's voice was thin, weakened by months of treatment. She missed some notes, forgot some words. But Whitney adjusted, lowered her own volume, matched Emma's pace. For the first time in her career, Whitney Houston wasn't performing, she was sharing. When they reached the chorus, Emma's legs began to shake. Without missing a note, Whitney wrapped her arm around the girl's waist, supporting her. They sang together, "Learning to love yourself, it is the greatest love of all." But the moment that would break everyone was approaching. Halfway through the second verse, Emma's voice cracked and faded. She was exhausted. Whitney felt the girl's weight shift, leaning heavily against her. The orchestra continued, But Whitney stopped singing. She knelt down again, microphone still in hand, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "It's okay, baby, you did perfect." Emma whispered something back. The microphone caught it. "I'm scared, Whitney." 5 words. 5 words that turned the Royal Albert Hall into a cathedral of silence. Whitney pulled Emma close, designer gown be damned, and held her. The orchestra stopped. The conductor lowered his baton. For 15 seconds, the only sound was Whitney Houston crying into a dying child's shoulder. Then Whitney did something that would define the rest of her career. She stood up, lifted Emma into her arms. The girl weighed so little, and walked to the grand piano at stage right. She sat down on the bench, Emma on her lap, and began to play with one hand while holding the girl with the other. No orchestra, no backing track, just Whitney Houston, a piano and a promise to a dying child. She sang the rest of Greatest Love of All as a lullaby, her voice soft and maternal. Emma rested her head against Whitney's shoulder, eyes closed, breathing steadily. The Royal Albert Hall's perfect acoustics carried every note, every breath, every tear that fell from Whitney's face onto the piano keys. When she reached the final line, "Learning to love yourself, it is the greatest love of all," Emma lifted her head and sang the last word with her all. The silence that followed lasted 7 seconds. Then the Royal Albert Hall erupted. The standing ovation lasted 11 minutes. Whitney didn't stand. She stayed seated at the piano, holding Emma, whispering to her, both of them crying and laughing simultaneously. The story should end here, but it doesn't. Marcus carried Emma back to her mother. Sarah Clark was sobbing so hard she could barely stand. When Whitney returned to center stage, her gown was wrinkled, her makeup destroyed, her carefully styled hair disheveled. She looked more beautiful than anyone had ever seen her. "I'm going to finish this concert," Whitney announced, her voice raw with emotion, "but I'm dedicating every song to Emma Clark, and to every child fighting battles we can't imagine. And Emma," she looked directly at the 3rd row, "you have the most beautiful voice I've ever heard. Not because of how it sounds, but because of the courage it takes to use it." The next detail changes everything about how this night is remembered. Whitney performed for another hour, but after every song, she looked at the 3rd row, checking on Emma. The girl stayed for the entire concert, wrapped in her mother's arms, sometimes sleeping, sometimes watching with eyes wide with wonder. During "I Will Always Love You," the final song of the night, something extraordinary happened. As Whitney hit the famous key change, "And I Will Always Love You," a voice joined her from the audience. It was Emma, standing again, singing with every ounce of strength she had left. One by one, the entire audience joined in, 5,272 voices singing together, following the lead of a 12-year-old girl who would die 17 days later, on April 1, 1994, at 3:47 a.m., with her mother holding one hand and a cassette player playing Whitney Houston holding the other. But the most haunting part happened after the concert ended. Whitney didn't leave after the show. She waited until the venue emptied, until the only people left were the cleaning crew, her team, and the Clark family. She sat with Emma in the empty hall for another hour, just talking, no cameras, no media, no publicity. Emma asked Whitney to sing one more song, just for her. Whitney chose Home from the Wiz. She sang it a cappella, her voice echoing through the empty Royal Albert Hall like a prayer. Emma fell asleep during the second verse, her head on Whitney's lap. According to Sarah Clark, Whitney's last words to Emma that night were, "You didn't just sing with me tonight, baby. You reminded me why we sing at all." The forgotten detail that nobody talks about: 3 weeks after Emma's death, Whitney Houston returned to the Royal Albert Hall. She rented it privately. No audience, no orchestra. She stood on the same stage, in the same spot where Emma had stood, and sang Greatest Love of All one more time. The only person present was Sarah Clark, Emma's mother, sitting in the same third-row seat. When fans wonder why Whitney's performances of that song changed after 1994, why she always seemed to look at one specific spot in the audience, now you know. She was looking for Emma. She never stopped looking for Emma. The Royal Albert Hall has a tradition, a plaque for legendary performances. There's one for the Beatles, one for Pavarotti, one for dozens of historic nights. But if you go to the third row, center section, seat 17, you'll find something different. A small purple ribbon, replaced every year by an anonymous donor. The cleaning staff has been instructed never to remove it. Whitney Houston performed over 600 concerts in her career. She sang for presidents, for royalty, for millions of fans across the globe. But according to her journal, discovered after her death in 2012, one entry stands out, dated March 16, 1994. Last night, a little girl named Emma taught me something I'd forgotten. We don't sing to impress. We don't sing for fame. We don't sing for money. We sing because someone, somewhere, needs to hear that they're not alone, that they're loved, that they matter. Emma Clark mattered. She mattered so much that she changed my life in 3 minutes and 47 seconds, the exact length of Greatest Love of All. Here's the part that will haunt you. Every year, on March 15th, until her death in 2012, Whitney Houston did something unusual. No matter where she was in the world, at exactly 8:47 p.m. London time, the moment Emma stood up with her sign, Whitney would stop whatever she was doing and sing a few bars of Greatest Love of All. Her assistants knew not to schedule anything during that time. Her family knew not to call. It was Whitney's sacred moment with a ghost that smiled. Sarah Clark, Emma's mother, went on to establish the Emma Clark Foundation, which provides concert tickets to terminally ill children. Whitney Houston was their first and largest donor, though she insisted on remaining anonymous. The foundation has sent over 10,000 children to concerts. Each child receives a purple ribbon and a note that says, "Sing loud, sing proud, sing like Emma." The final truth, nobody knew until now. In Whitney's dressing room at every concert after March 15, 1994, there was always an empty chair with a purple scarf draped over it. When new crew members asked about it, they were told, "That's Emma's seat. She never misses a show." On February 11, 2012, the night Whitney Houston died, hotel staff found something unusual in her Beverly Hilton room. On the mirror, written in lipstick, were the words, "Emma, I'm coming to sing with you again." The Royal Albert Hall concert of March 15, 1994, was recorded in full. The footage exists in the venue's archives, but it has never been released. Sarah Clark has a copy. She's watched it once, on the 10th anniversary of Emma's death. She said she could only make it through half before the tears made it impossible to continue. One last detail that changes everything. 3 months before her death, Whitney Houston called Sarah Clark. They hadn't spoken in years, but Whitney had something to tell her. She was planning a comeback tour, and she wanted to perform at the Royal Albert Hall on March 15, 2012, the 18th anniversary of meeting Emma. She wanted Sarah in the third row, seat 17. Whitney died 27 days before that concert would have happened. Sarah Clark still went to the Royal Albert Hall on March 15, 2012. The venue was dark, empty, closed for renovations, but the management, knowing the story, let her in. She sat in seat 17 for 2 hours. At exactly 8:47 p.m., she swears she heard something impossible. 2 voices, singing together, somewhere in the distance. Learning to love yourself, it is the greatest love of all. The security guard on duty that night, William Patterson, filed a report stating he heard singing in the empty building but could find no source. The report was dismissed as imagination. The building was empty, completely empty. Or was it? Some moments transcend time. Some voices never really fade. And sometimes, just sometimes, love is stronger than death. Whitney Houston and Emma Clark sang together for 3 minutes and 47 seconds on March 15, 1994. But maybe, just maybe, they never really stopped. The purple ribbon is still there. Row 3, Seat 17, Royal Albert Hall. Go see for yourself. You'll understand everything when you do.